At times, we tend to take for granted the brilliant inventions that we see as necessities, as rights, not privileges. Well, way back in the days leading up to the early 1900s, the average American couldn't buy the car first created by Francois Isaac de Rivaz in 1807. He designed the first car powered by a internal combustion engine fueled by hydrogen. In 1886, the first petrol or gasoline-powered automobile, the Benz patent motor wagon, was invented by Carl Benz. Most Americans saw buying a car as a pipe dream. That wasn't until Henry Ford came along and made a few tweaks to the car industry in order to make buying a car more obtainable for almost every American. The impacts of Ford insights and visions reach all the way into our modern era and will never be forgotten by his thankful American people.
The automobile, first seen as a horseless carriage, was invented in 1885 by German inventor Carl Benz. By then, Henry Ford had lived 22 years, and he grew up the son of a farmer, William Ford, who had hoped that Henry would someday take over their farm in Michigan. Henry Ford knew his calling was a mechanist. He dropped out of school at 16, moved to Detroit, and worked as a mechanist apprentice and a repairman. In 1896, at the age of 33, he designed his first car. Two failed ventures later, he was 40 years old and nowhere near influential. By then, he was visited by the American dream. He tried again in 1903 with the help of Alexander Macom's son, an old friend of Detroit Coal Deer, was impressed by Ford's latest automobile design, which racer Barney Oldfield had driven to a Racing's Cup first place. He started the Ford Motor Company. Oldfield's successes helped attract investors, and Ford redoubled his efforts on a new design. Ford studied how cars were created, how they were functioned, and just as important, how their parts were created and functioned. By 1908, he used the recent industrial trends of an assembly line and interchangeable parts in order to assemble a car more quickly than anyone had done before. In just 45 steps, his workers can manufacture an automobile in just over 90 minutes, down from the nearly 13 hours it took earlier in the decade. Ford's investors told him the way to increase profits was to make a car that rich consumers felt compelled to buy. They, after all, had the money in a time where the Industrial Revolution excelled at suppressing the wages of expendable workers. For his unmatched contribution to American industrialism and the numerous effects on production and consumerism, Henry Ford is the 20th most influential figure in Western history.
At the start of automobile selling, the buyer's purpose of getting the automobile was to flaunt their wealth, but it proved to be more convenient than the toy that they bought it for. The Model T was the first breakthrough for the car industry and ignited the buying of automobiles for practical use. There were many downsides of this, however. Fabricating one car produced 29 tons of waste and 1,207 million cubic yards of polluted air. The issue of gasoline also became prevalent. Gasoline had to be obtained at bulk deposits. These were located outside of the cities, and the fuel was provided in cans and other containers. Gas use increased heavily in result of the high automobile purchasing. Also during the 1920s, a driver's license was not needed in most states. There were no signs, signals, or traffic enforcement, and in many cases, the roads were filled with potholes. Accidents took a high increase because these lack of precautions. American industry for cars started the economic boom for America and created a convenient way of transportation. The development of the roads also made it easier to travel by other means. For example, the roads for cars also allowed people to travel by horse, foot, and by car, and was much more convenient than using water canals.
Ford's ideas made a lasting impact and left a legacy greater than just the increase in car production and usage in the 1920s, as shown by the graphs. Ford's key adjustments made for a steady model of production that could be repeated and built for a low price. The use of the assembly line sneaks in today's era as we continue to use the system to build and implement products into society faster. The assembly line also lowers production costs so more people can easily purchase a car at a lower and more affordable price. This concept would seemingly be relevant to almost any era, as people always want to pay less and expedite any process. Without Ford's car, America's economy and social rankings would be heavily skewed, and the importance of money would play a heavier role than it already does in our society. One negative of the use of more cars was the pollution that penetrated the clean air in Ford's era, the 1920s, and a little bit before that. This was to be expected, as any time a chemical is released into the atmosphere, adverse effects are to follow. The issue of pollution still impacts us today, especially in the more populated areas of Los Angeles and China. Car accidents were also very prevalent during the creation of Ford's Model T car. There were very little rules of the road, and drivers barely needed a driver's license to drive a car. Ford's production led to great growth in the economic world and will always be looked upon as one of the most revolutionary thinkers and inventors the world has ever seen.